Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. We're not visiting a battlefield or a palace. No, we're going somewhere much more aromatic. We're traveling back to the heart of the Roman Empire, not as a senator or a legionary, but as someone with a much humbler and far more pungent occupation. Tonight, you are a new apprentice in a Roman fullonica, a laundry. And let me tell you, if you have a weak stomach, you might not make it through your first day. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment below telling me what city you're listening from and the exact time right now. I love building this little global, time-shifted community. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing that hits you is the smell. It's not just one smell, it's a layered, complex assault on your senses. There's the damp earth scent of wet clay from the massive vats, the slightly sour note of the cheap wine you drank for breakfast, and the general, sweaty musk of a bustling Italian afternoon. But overlying it all, sharp, acrid, and impossible to ignore, is the eye-watering, throat-catching reek of ammonia. You stand in the doorway of the fullonica, a modest workshop tucked into a side street of ancient Rome, your sandals sticking slightly to the well-trodden dirt floor. Your new master, a burly man named Lucius with forearms like ham hocks, gives you a gap-toothed grin and claps you on the back, nearly sending you sprawling. "Welcome to the real Rome, boy," he chuckles. "Forget the marble and the speeches. This," he gestures with a thick arm at the steamy, chaotic room, "is what keeps the togas white and the senators happy." You take in the scene. Workers, their tunics hitched up to their thighs, are standing in a series of shallow tanks, stomping rhythmically on piles of cloth. The sound is a wet, sloshing percussion, a symphony of cleanliness. Others are scrubbing garments with a paste that looks suspiciously like clay, and over in the corner, a young boy is carefully tending to a large, sealed ceramic jar that's being heated over a low fire. That, you will soon learn, is the source of the most potent layer of the smell. That's the special ingredient. A mainstream historical fact you'll grapple with is that the Roman laundry industry was a massive, professionalized operation, crucial for a society that placed a high value on the appearance and cleanliness of its woolen garments, especially the iconic toga. But here's your first cold, quirky little fact: the pee. Primary cleaning agent, the Roman equivalent of our industrial-strength detergent, was fermented human urine. And I do mean fermented. It wasn't used fresh, it was collected and left to stew for weeks, sometimes months, to allow the urea to break down into ammonia, making it far more potent. Now, why on earth they stuck with this method so fervently, when other options existed, is something historians still debate. Some argue it was simply the most effective and readily available chemical they had, while others suggest it became deeply embedded in a complex economic and social system that was hard to disrupt. For now, you just try to breathe through your mouth as Lucius leads you toward your first task, the stomping vats. Lucius guides you away from the stomping vats, his grip firm on your shoulder. "The dancing can wait," he says, a glint in his eye. First, you need to meet the true star of our show. You need to understand the lotion. That's the word that snaps you to attention. Lotion. It's the polite, professional term for it, stripping away the vulgarity, transforming a bodily waste product into a commodity. He leads you to a cool, dark corner of the workshop where rows of large, amphorae, the same kind used for wine and olive oil, are lined up against the wall. Each is carefully sealed with a waxed cloth and a clay lid. This is the cellar, the treasure vault. The smell here is different. It's less immediately offensive, more concentrated, like a sharp, chemical promise of what's to come. Don't make that face, Lucius chides, noticing your involuntary grimace. This isn't just piss. This is liquid gold. This is chemistry. He taps the side of one of the amphorae with a certain reverence. See this one? This batch is from the public latrines near the forum. Good, strong stuff. The patrons there eat well, drink good wine. It makes for a potent brew. This smaller one, he points to a different jar, is from the local tavern. Cheaper wine, more water. Weaker. We use that for the first rinse on the really filthy work tunics. You're getting a crash course in the sommelier-ship of urine, learning to discern the vintages and provenances of a substance you'd never thought to categorize. The mainstream historical knowledge here is that the Romans were practical chemists. They didn't have the molecular theory, but through centuries of trial and error, they understood the cleaning power of aged urine. The urea in fresh urine decomposes over time into ammonia, a powerful alkali. This ammonia solution is WH. It does the magic. It cuts through grease and grime, neutralizes acids that cause stains, and when combined with the mechanical action of the fuller's feet, it leaves woolen cloth not just clean, but brighter and softer. But here's the quirky, less discussed detail that Lucius shares with you as he runs his hand over the smooth terracotta. The aging process was everything. Fresh urine was practically useless. It had to sit, sometimes for a month or more, in these sealed jars. The fuller knew it was ready not by a date, but by the smell and the texture. When it stings your eyes from across the room and has a certain thickness to it, he explains, miming the action of testing it between his fingers. That's when you know the spirit has awakened inside. It was a form of controlled rot, a deliberate cultivation of bacteria to perform a chemical transformation. And as for the great historical debate that scholars still love to argue over, it revolves around the sheer scale. While we know they did this, modern historians and chemists still puzzle over the exact logistics of collecting enough of this material to supply an entire city's laundry needs. Was the public collection system so efficient? Did they supplement it with animal waste? The precise calculations of the Roman urine-based economy remain, to some extent, a fragrant mystery. Lucius, however, has no such doubts. He sees only inventory, value, and the key to a well-bleached toga. "Remember, boy," he says, his voice low and serious. "In Rome, nothing goes to waste. Everything has a purpose. Even this." He gives the amphora a final, solid pat. Lucius, seeing your dawning comprehension of the lotion's value, decides it's time for a field trip. Enough theory, he booms, steering you out of the workshop and into the blinding sunlight of a Roman side street. Let's see the supply chain. You blink, your eyes adjusting, and as they do, you start to see the city with new eyes. Rome, you realize, is not just a city of marble and aqueducts, it's a city of vessels and conduits, a metropolis built on the efficient movement of all things, liquid and solid. And your precious lotion has its own dedicated pathways. You notice them now, large earthenware jars, called dolia, strategically placed in the shadows of alleyways, at the backs of taverns, and, most prominently, near the entrances of public latrines. They are the unassuming, ubiquitous collection points of the empire's most humble resource. This isn't a haphazard system, it's an informal but deeply ingrained municipal utility. Tavern owners place them for their patrons, knowing the fullers will pay a few arses for a full jar. Landlords of insulae, the towering, rickety apartment blocks, have them in the courtyards for their tenants. The mainstream historical fact you're witnessing is the existence of a sophisticated, citywide recycling economy. Nothing that could be used was truly considered waste. The Roman world was, in many ways, a pre-industrial circular economy, and urine was a key commodity in that cycle. But here's the quirky, human detail that brings it to life. As you walk with Lucius, you see a young slave boy, no older than 10, carefully rolling a small, brimming dolium along the street using a special wooden frame. He's one of the many collectors, the unsung heroes of the laundry trade. He'll take his jar to a central collection point, maybe in the basement. Tea of a fuller's shop like Lucius's, and receive a small coin or a piece of bread for his effort. It's a menial job, but it's a cog in a vast, smelly machine that ensures a senator's toga arrives at the fullonica ready to be transformed. The system is so established that it even has its own slang and social hierarchies. Lucius nods at the boy. "The little ants," he says, not unkindly. "They keep the hill fed." And this is where we touch upon a point that historians still vigorously debate, the legality and social perception of this collection. Was it a free-for-all? Were there urine rights? We know from legal texts that there were sometimes disputes. If a collector placed a jar on a public street, who owned the contents? If it was placed on private property, like a tavern, did the tavern owner or the fuller who supplied the jar have claim? There are records of lawsuits and imperial edicts that hint at a complex, and often contentious, web of ownership over what we would simply flush away. It was a resource valuable enough to fight over. Lucius, of course, operates on a simpler principle. He has his regular routes, his agreements. He points to a particular tavern. Good relationship with that one. I give him a discount on cleaning his bar rags. He gives me first pick of his jars. It's all about networks, a commerce built on trust and the universal understanding of value, even when that value comes in a jar that makes your eyes water. As you and Lucius make your way back to the fullonica, the bustling, smelly reality of Rome surrounds you. But he doesn't lead you straight inside. Instead, he stops you in the street and points south, a distant look in his eyes. You know, he says, his voice dropping from its usual boom to a more contemplative rumble, the gods have a strange way of preserving things. Sometimes they don't write it in a book. Sometimes they just freeze it in fire and rock. He's talking about the event that, centuries later, would become the single greatest gift to archaeologists trying to understand daily life in a Roman town, the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79. Your mind, still anchored in your present journey, now gets a flash of a different kind of preservation. You're no longer just in a smelly street in Rome, you're also seeing, in your mind's eye, the city of Pompeii on that fateful August day. The mainstream historical fact here is unparalleled. The volcanic ash and pumice that buried Pompeii and Herculaneum didn't just destroy them, it created a perfect, tragic time capsule. It sealed bakeries with bread still in the ovens, homes with meals on the table, and, most importantly for you in your current profession, it preserved the fullonica. We aren't just guessing about how these laundries worked, we know. We have the buildings, the vats, the tools, even the political campaign slogans painted on their outside walls. And here is the cold, quirky, and utterly fascinating piece of evidence that was found. In the ruins of these Pompeian laundries, archaeologists discovered those large, collection jars, the dolia. And inside them, they found residue. When analyzed, that residue contained traces of chemicals consistent with, you guessed it, ammonia and other byproducts of fermente. Urine. It was the literal, physical proof, sitting in a jar for nearly 2,000 years, confirming what the written texts had described. It's one thing to read Pliny the Elder talking about it, it's another to find the actual, chemical ghost of the substance itself, waiting patiently in the dark. This brings us to a point that historians and archaeologists still passionately debate. The eruption gives us an impossibly clear snapshot, but it's a snapshot of a single moment in two specific, relatively small towns. How representative is Pompeii of the entire Roman Empire? Was the laundry industry here, in this prosperous Bay of Naples resort town, run exactly the same way as it was in the sprawling, metropolitan chaos of Rome itself, or in a military outpost in Britannia? The level of preservation is both a blessing and a curse. It can make us overgeneralize. Scholars still argue over the scale of the operations in Pompeii versus other evidence we have from larger cities, trying to piece together a more nuanced picture of this smelly but essential trade across the vastness of the empire. Lucius brings you back to the present, his philosophical moment past. A grim way to be remembered, he grunts, pushing open the door to his workshop, the familiar ammonia sting welcoming you back. But at least they remembered. Now, let's put their knowledge to use. The vats are waiting. Back inside the fullonica, the theoretical becomes violently practical. Lucius leads you past the stomping vats to a separate, smaller area where the air is so thick with the smell of ammonia it feels like a physical weight on your tongue. This is the bleaching section, the inner sanctum where the real chemical magic happens. Here, larger, deeper vats hold a liquid that is noticeably more pungent and murkier than the one the stompers are using. This, Lucius announces with the pride of a master chef presenting his signature dish, is the final bath. This is where we make the wool sing. Your job, he explains, is not to stomp here. It's to carefully submerge the already washed, rinsed garments into this potent ammonia broth. Using a long wooden paddle, you lift a heavy, wet tunic that has already been through the initial cleaning and sink it into the vat. The mainstream historical process you're now a part of is a multi-stage one. The clothes were first washed in a milder urine solution or with other detergents like Fuller's Earth, a type of clay, then rinsed. But this final soak in the strong, aged lotion was the key to achieving the brilliant white that was so prized, especially for the formal toga. The ammonia not only acted as a powerful degreaser but also reacted with the natural lanolin and other compounds in the wool, creating a chemical bleaching effect that sunlight alone couldn't achieve. But here is the quirky, hands-on detail that you experience firsthand. As you work the paddle, Lucius instructs you to add a second ingredient to the vat from a nearby sack, a fine, white powder. This is Creta fullonica, Fuller's Earth, a type of absorbent clay. The lotion opens the fibers, he says, his voice a low rumble beside you. The clay soaks up the filth it loosens, and it gives the wool a bit of body, makes it feel more valuable. So it's not just a urine bath, it's a sophisticated, two-part chemical and absorbent treatment. The ammonia does the dissolving, and the clay acts as a particulate, trapping and removing the dissolved grime. You're essentially witnessing an ancient form of laundry detergent with both liquid and powder components. And this precise combination, this alchemical recipe, is something historians and experimental archaeologists still debate. The written sources mention both urine and Fuller's Earth, but the exact ratios, the timing, the specific order of operations, these were the trade secrets of each fullonica. Was the earth mixed directly into the urine vat, as you're doing now? Or was it applied as a paste after the urine soak? The evidence is fragmentary, and the results would have varied. Lucius has his method, passed down from his father, and he guards it jealously. He watches you like a hawk as you sprinkle the clay, ensuring you don't use a pinch too much or too little. In this vat, amid the eye-watering vapor, you are participating in a living, breathing, and fiercely protected ancient technology. The perfect white of a senator's toga, a symbol of purity and status, was born right here, in this pungent, swirling mixture. Just as you're finding a rhythm with the paddle, the workshop's entrance darkens. A man in a simple but clean tunic enters, carrying a wax tablet and a stylus. He doesn't look like a customer. Lucius lets out a long-suffering sigh. A sound you're learning is reserved for two things: incompetent apprentices and government officials. The eagle's beak, he mutters to you under his breath before pasting on a professional smile. Marcus! Always a pleasure. This, you quickly gather, is a tax collector. And he's not here for coins, not directly. He's conducting an assessment. He moves through the workshop, not looking at the clothes, but at the jars. He counts the dolia of aging lotion. He peers into the vats, estimating their capacity. The mainstream historical fact you are now confronting is the infamous vectigal urinae, the urine tax. Instituted by the Emperor Vespasian around AD 70, just a few years before Vesuvius erupted, this tax was levied on the collection of urine from public latrines, which was then sold to the fullers. It's the origin of the French phrase les toilettes vespasiennes for public urinals, and the English saying money doesn't smell, pecunia non olet, which Vespasian supposedly retorted to his son Titus when he complained about the unsavory nature of the revenue. But here is the cold, practical, and slightly quirky reality of the tax that you witness. It wasn't a simple flat fee. The amount was likely based on the scale of the operation. The size of your vats, the number of your collection jars, these were the metrics of your tax liability. The collector, Marcus, notes something on his tablet. Your collection has increased since last quarter, Lucius. Business is good, I see. It's a statement, not a question. The tax was a clever piece of imperial finance, a way to monetize a public health nuisance and tap into a thriving, essential industry. The state had found a way to make the very city's waste stream a source of revenue. This leads us to a nuance that economic historians still debate fiercely. How was this tax actually administered and collected? Did the state own the public latrines and lease out the collection rights, like a concession? Or did they tax the fullers directly on the urine they acquired, as seems to be happening here with Marcus? The evidence is scant, and it's possible the system varied from city to city. The famous story about Vespasian and the money likely oversimplifies a complex fiscal mechanism. Lucius negotiates with Marcus, pointing out a cracked jar that's out of commission, arguing for a slight reduction. It's a dance as old as bureaucracy itself. You stand there, paddle in hand, realizing that even this most basic, pungent element of your new trade is entangled with the long arm of the Roman state, an arm that was not afraid to get its hands, and its ledger, a little smelly. After the tax collector, Marcus, departs with a final notation on his wax tablet, the atmosphere in the fullonica lightens palpably. Lucius scowls at the empty doorway before spitting philosophically into a drain. Philosophers, he grunts, the word sounding like a curse. They write their pretty scrolls by the light of scented lamps, their noses in the air, complaining about the stench of commerce from their ivory towers. He gestures around the steamy, chaotic workshop. This stench is what pays for their lamp oil. His rant opens a window into a mainstream intellectual debate of the time. The Roman elite, for all their practical engineering prowess, held a deep-seated ambivalence towards trade and manual labor. Cicero himself classified occupations, placing those requiring mere physical effort, like fulling, at the bottom, deeming them vulgar and unsuited to a gentleman. The smell of a fullonica was a literal and metaphorical marker of this low status. Senators needed clean, bright togas to display their rank, but they preferred not to think about the pungent, industrial process that made it possible. But here is the quirky, human counterargument that you experience not from a scroll, but from Lucius's pride. He leads you to a finished garment, a toga that has been through the final rinse and is now a stunning, brilliant white. He runs his calloused fingers over the soft, clean wool with a tenderness that surprises you. A philosopher sniffs at my smell, he says, his voice low. But let him wear a toga washed with inferior soap. Let it be grey, let it be stiff. See how much wisdom he spouts then. His work, his art, his craft, has a tangible, visible result that the intellectual posturing of the elite could never achieve. The smell was a temporary, necessary product of a transformative process. And this social tension between the practical necessity of the fuller's work and the elite's disdain for its methods is something scholars still actively debate. How did the fullers themselves perceive their social position? Were they ashamed, or were they, like Lucius, defiantly proud? The archaeological record from places like Pompeii shows that some fullonica owners were wealthy enough to own large houses and fund public buildings, suggesting that while the work itself was looked down upon, the economic success it could bring commanded a certain respect. The line between social odor and financial power was blurred. Lucius, watching you absorb this, gives a sharp, barking laugh. Don't worry, boy. Their noses are too high in the air to smell anything real. They live in a world of ideas. We, he says, slapping the pristine toga, we live in the world. And with that, he hands you a broom and points to the ever-present puddles on the floor, bringing your philosophical moment back to the very grounded reality of cleanup. As you sweep, your mind drifts from the lofty criticisms of philosophers to the very grounded reality of the men working around you. They are a guild, a collegium. You see it in the easy camaraderie, the shared jokes that bounce over the slosh of the vats, the way they sometimes help each other wring out a particularly heavy, waterlogged cloak. This is not just a random group of laborers, it's a professional brotherhood. Lucius notices your observation. We look after our own, he says, his earlier irritation gone. The Collegium Fallonum pays for a proper funeral if you fall into a vat and drown. Your family gets a stipend. We celebrate the Saturnalia together like a proper family. This touches on a mainstream historical fact. Trade guilds, collegia, were a fundamental part of Roman social and economic life. They provided a sense of identity, mutual aid, and a collective voice for artisans and merchants. For fullers, a guild was essential. It standardized practices, set prices to prevent destructive undercutting, and offered a form of social security in a world without any state-sponsored safety net. It transformed a dirty job into a recognized profession with its own traditions, patron deities like Mercury, god of commerce, and internal hierarchy, from the master fuller like Lucius down to the apprentices like you. But here is the fascinating, quirky detail of their political influence. In towns like Pompeii, the fullers were numerous and economically powerful enough to be a political bloc. Archaeological evidence reveals that the full ones publicly endorsed political candidates by painting electoral endorsements on the outside walls of their workshops. Imagine that, your local laundry urging the neighborhood to vote for a particular politician. Their endorsement was a form of advertising, a signal that a candidate had the support of a robust, essential, and locally respected industry. They weren't just cleaning clothes, they were cleaning up in local politics. This, of course, leads to a question that historians still debate: just how much political power did these guilds truly wield? Were their endorsements merely a transactional relationship where a candidate promised them favorable treatment in return for public support? Or did they represent a genuine, grassroots form of political organization for the non-elite classes? The evidence is painted on the walls for all to see, but the true nature of the backroom deals, the extent of their influence beyond the neighborhood level, remains shrouded in the steam of the fullonica. Lucius, however, has no doubts about his guild's importance. "A man alone is just a man," he says, "taking the broom from you. But men together? That's a collegium. And in Rome, that means something." He nods towards a small shrine in the corner of the workshop, where a small, bronze statue of Mercury stands, a few dried flowers at its feet. It's a humble monument to commerce, community, and the collective power of those who weren't afraid to get their hands, and their entire workplace, smelling a little funky. Your sweeping complete, Lucius decides your education needs broadening. "You think we only clean clothes?" he asks, a sly grin spreading across his face. The lotion is a versatile tool. Its talents are multifaceted. He leads you out of the main workshop again, but this time not to the street. He takes you to a smaller, attached shed you hadn't noticed before. The smell here is different, still tinged with ammonia, but mixed with the rich, organic scent of animal hides and the tannic bitterness of bark. Here, a man with hands stained dark brown is carefully stretching a supple piece of leather. "This is Gaius," Lucius says. The lotion works for him, too. The mainstream historical application you're now seeing is the use of urine in the tanning industry. The ammonia in the aged urine served a crucial purpose in the early stages of preparing leather. It was used to soak the hides to remove hair and residual flesh, a process called a dehairing or baiting. The alkaline solution softened the skin and loosened the hair follicles, making the hides easier to scrape clean and more receptive to the tanning agents that would follow. It was another brutal, smelly, but utterly essential step in transforming a raw animal skin into durable leather for sandals, shields, and saddles. But here is the truly bizarre and quirky extension of its use that Lucius whispers to you with a hint of macabre pride. "And the doctors," he says, lowering his voice as if sharing a state secret, "they have their uses for it, too." You stare at him, incredulous. He nods solemnly. Indeed, several Roman medical writers, including the famed Galen, recorded urine, both human and animal, as an ingredient in certain medicinal compounds. It was sometimes applied as a disinfectant for wounds, which, given the antibacterial properties of ammonia, might have had some marginal effect, or used in concoctions meant to treat everything from sores to stomach ailments. There are even accounts, which modern historians view with extreme skepticism, of people drinking it for its purported curative properties. This widespread, almost alchemical belief in the power of urine inevitably leads to a point of intense historical debate. Where did the line between observed chemical efficacy and pure superstition lie? The fullers and tanners could see the tangible, practical results: cleaner clothes, softer leather. But the medical applications likely ventured far into the realm of sympathetic magic and tradition. Scholars still argue over how much of this was based on genuine, empirical observation and how much was simply a like cures like or a potent substance must be good for you fallacy. Was it a brilliant, if unorthodox, use of available chemicals, or a testament to the desperation of ancient medicine? Standing in that shed, watching the tanner work and hearing Lucius's claims, you are faced with the whole, unvarnished spectrum of Roman practicality, a world where the same jar of liquid could be used to whiten a senator's symbol of office, soften a soldier's boot, and, allegedly, cure a common cold. The thought of drinking the lotion, even medicinally, turns your stomach. Seeking fresher air, you step back into the narrow alley behind the workshop. As you stand there, a group of foreign traders passes by, their dress and accents marking them as from the far northern provinces, perhaps Germania or Britannia. One of them catches a powerful whiff from the fullonica's open door. He wrinkles his nose, turns to his companion, and makes a sharp, guttural comment in his own tongue. The companion laughs, shaking his head in what looks like a mixture of disbelief and derision. You don't need to understand the language to get the gist. These Romans are crazy. This imagined moment highlights a mainstream historical reality. The Roman custom of using urine for laundry was not a universal practice. Many of the peoples they conquered and traded with found the habit bizarre and revolting. The Roman writer Strabo, commenting on the habits of the Iberians, noted their astonishment at the Roman practice, viewing it as a peculiar and unclean quirk of the otherwise advanced civilization. To cultures that might have used plant-based soaps, ashlie, or simply vigorous beating in clean water, the idea of stewing clothes in fermented human waste was the height of strangeness. But here is the wonderfully quirky counterpoint that history provides. While the Romans were being judged by their northern neighbors, they themselves were looking even further east with a sense of superiority. The Romans were aware that the Chinese Han Dynasty, their great imperial counterpart on the other side of the world, also produced magnificent silks. And they knew that cleaning delicate silk was a delicate process. While the evidence is not conclusive, some Roman writers expressed a smug belief that their methods were more robust, more practical, than whatever mysterious techniques the Seers, the Chinese, might use. They saw their system, for all its smell, as a testament to their no-nonsense, utilitarian approach to life's problems. This naturally brings us to a fascinating area that historians still debate: the true extent of cultural exchange and perception along the Silk Road. Did the Chinese ever hear about the Roman laundry habits, and if so, what did they think? Were the Romans correct in their assumption that their methods were unique, or were there parallel, if less documented, uses of alkaline substances like urine in other parts of the world? The sheer distance and slow flow of information mean we have only fragments. The Roman method, so normal within the context of their empire, was a cultural oddity to outsiders, just as other customs seemed strange to Roman eyes. Standing in that alley, you are at a crossroads of ancient globalization, where the smell of a laundry wasn't just a smell, it was a cultural identifier, a line in the sand, or the vat, that separated Roman practicality from what they saw as barbarian ignorance, and vice versa. The derisive laughter of the foreign traders echoes in your mind as you slip back inside the fullonica. The smell, once a pure assault, is now becoming a complex text you're learning to read. You find yourself staring into the murky depths of the bleaching vat, the sharp ammonia vapor prickling in your nostrils. Why does this work? The question forms not as a historical curiosity, but as a physical one. Lucius explained it as the spirit awakening, but your modern mind, a ghost in this ancient machine, craves a different answer. It yearns for the language of molecules. So let's pull back for a moment out of the steamy workshop and look at this with a modern lens. The mainstream scientific fact is that urine is not just waste, it's a complex chemical solution. Its key component for cleaning is urea, a nitrogen-based compound. When you leave urine to stand, as the Romans did, bacteria in the air and the liquid itself get to work. They feast on the urea, breaking it down through a process called hydrolysis. The primary byproduct of this bacterial banquet is ammonia, a volatile gas that dissolves in water to form a powerfully alkaline solution. This is the awakening Lucius spoke of. But here is the quirky, molecular-level detail of what happens next. Grease and dirt on woolen garments are typically acidic or nonpolar. Ammonia, being a strong base, is a champion at saponification. It reacts with fatty acids, effectively turning them into a crude, water-soluble soap. It also disrupts hydrogen bonds, helping to lift stains and suspend the dirt particles in the water, ready to be washed or absorbed away. Furthermore, ammonia acts as a bleaching agent by reacting with colored compounds in the stains, altering their molecular structure and making them colorless. So, when you say, that toga emerge brilliantly white, you're witnessing a series of successful chemical reactions, hydrolysis, saponification, and oxidation. This precise chemical interplay, so clear to us now, leads to a question that historians of science and technology still find rich for debate. How close were the Romans to understanding the actual chemistry? They had no concept of molecules, bacteria, or ammonia. They operated on a principle of observed cause and effect, refined over generations. Was their knowledge purely empirical, a set of instructions passed down, let it sit until it stings the eyes, or did they have a more sophisticated, if pre-scientific, theoretical framework for why it worked? Some scholars argue that their ability to consistently produce such effective results across an empire suggests a deeper, systemic understanding of material transformation. Others maintain it was the result of brilliant, blind trial and error. As you look at the vat, you realize you are seeing two truths simultaneously: Lucius's world of awakened spirits, and the invisible, bustling world of bacteria and chemical bonds, both leading to the same pristine, white toga. The rhythmic sloshing of the fullonica begins to feel eternal, a constant of the Roman world. But as you help Lucius stack the last of the day's cleaned and dried garments, a thought, quiet but persistent, enters your mind: this doesn't last forever. The empire itself won't, and neither will this very specific, smelly tradition. You're witnessing a high water mark of a practice that, within a few centuries, will begin to recede like a tide. The great, interconnected machine of Rome that made the urine trade so efficient, the urban density, the trade guilds, the stable taxation, will slowly fracture. The mainstream historical narrative is one of slow decline and shifting habits. As the Western Roman Empire fragmented, the large-scale, urban fullonica that depended on a constant flow of city urine began to vanish. Trade routes destabilized, cities shrank, and the specialized, industrial-scale laundry operations became less feasible. Life became more rural, more localized. The elaborate, multi-stage process you've been part of was a luxury of a complex, centralized state. In its place, simpler methods regained prominence, washing clothes in streams with sand and ash for abrasion, or using locally available plant-based soaps, like those made from soapweight. But here is the quirky, cultural shift that accompanied the practical one. With the spread of Christianity, attitudes towards the body and its functions began to change. While the Romans were famously pragmatic, early Christian teachings often emphasized modesty and a certain distancing from bodily filth, not just moral, but physical. The elaborate, public collection of urine, and its use in such a prominent industry, may have begun to be viewed with a new kind of distaste, a sense of impropriety that didn't carry the same weight in the pagan world. The smell wasn't just smelly, it could be seen as sinful, or at least uncouth. The practice didn't vanish overnight, of course, but it lost its industrial sheen. This transition period is something historians still debate with great interest. Was the decline of Roman urine laundering primarily due to economic and structural collapse, or did changing cultural and religious sensibilities play a significant, accelerating role? It's likely a combination of both. The intricate system was fragile. When the empire's backbone broke, the system crumbled, and the new social norms that filled the vacuum had little interest in rebuilding it. The knowledge didn't disappear, people still knew urine could clean things, but the grand, smelly, professionalized art of it faded, becoming a rural folk remedy or a memory, while the streets of new kingdoms smelled, gradually, a little different. As the light outside the fullonica begins to soften into evening, Lucius dismisses the other workers, leaving the two of you to finish securing the workshop. There's a quiet melancholy to the place when the frantic activity ceases, the vat still and full, the jars of lotion standing like silent sentinels in the gloom. It makes you think of how this entire world, this noisy, smelly, vibrant reality, will be forgotten, then rediscovered, and then sanitized. The Romans themselves, in their own later years, would begin to look back on their past with a romantic, cleaning filtered gaze. The mainstream historical phenomenon you're anticipating is the Renaissance and the neoclassical revival. Centuries later, European scholars and artists would fall in love with the idea of Rome. They would devour the texts of Cicero and marvel at the ruins of the Forum. They would emulate Roman architecture, Roman law, and Roman philosophy. They would hold up the empire as a pinnacle of civilization, a model of order and grandeur. But in doing so, they would conveniently overlook the grittier, smellier, more mundane aspects of daily life. The fullonica didn't fit the marble and laurel's aesthetic. But here is the quirky, almost amusing, detail of this historical amnesia. When these later admirers read the classical texts that mention full ones and lotium, they often performed incredible intellectual gymnastics to avoid the obvious, smelly conclusion. Some scholars argued that the term lotium was a metaphor, or that it must have referred to some other, more palatable chemical. Others, translating ancient recipes, might quietly correct the text, assuming a scribal error had occurred. The reality was too vulgar, too undignified for their idealized vision of the noble Roman. They wanted to see senators in white togas, but they didn't want to know how they got so white. This leads us directly to a debate that still engages historians of reception today. To what extent has our modern perception of the Roman Empire been shaped by these later, sanitizing filters? Even now, when the evidence is undeniable, the popular image of Rome is often one of sterile majesty, not the pungent, industrious, and utterly practical world you've been living in. It's a constant battle for historians to push back against the romanticized version and reintroduce the smelly, noisy, and profoundly human reality. The rediscovery of places like Pompeii in the 18th century began to force the issue, presenting undeniable, physical evidence of the vats and the jars. But the preference for a clean, odorless past is a powerful force. As you help Lucius bar the heavy wooden door, you realize you are part of a story that future generations would, for a long time, prefer to pretend never happened. The bar thuds into place, locking in the day's smells and labors. You and Lucius step out into the twilight, the cool evening air feeling like a blessing on your face. He walks you a short way, not speaking, until you pause near a public fountain, its water splashing cleanly into a stone basin. He gestures back toward the workshop, now a dark silhouette against the indigo sky. People will forget the vats, he says, his voice quiet and steady. They'll call us barbarians for our smell. But the idea doesn't die. He cups his hands under the fountain's flow, letting the water trickle through his fingers. The need to transform one thing into another. That's the real magic. We just used what we had. His words hang in the air, connecting your day in the reeking fullonica to a future he can't possibly imagine. The mainstream historical thread you can now trace is the industrial production of ammonia. The modern world didn't abandon the Roman discovery, it found a more efficient, less aromatic way to achieve the same chemical result. In the early 20th century, the Haber-Bosch process was developed, a method to synthesize ammonia on an industrial scale from nitrogen in the air and hydrogen under high pressure. This invention, one of the most pivotal of the modern era, revolutionized agriculture by creating synthetic fertilizer, and of course, it also produced the ammonia used in a vast array of, you guessed it, modern cleaning products. But here is the profound, quirky echo of history. The chemical agent that makes your modern laundry detergent so effective at cutting through grease and brightening whites is the very same one Lucius cultivated in his jars, the ammonia molecule. The Romans were harnessing a biological, waste recycling method to produce it. We use a high-tech, energy-intensive chemical process. But the target, the active principle, is identical. We simply found a way to produce it without the smell of a public latrine, bottling the spirit of the lotion in a clean, plastic jug. This brings us to a point of deep reflection that environmental historians and scientists still vigorously debate. Which system is more advanced in the grand scheme? The Roman model was a masterpiece of local, circular recycling, turning a waste product into a valuable commodity with minimal external energy input. Our modern system is incredibly efficient and scalable, feeding billions, but it is also energy hungry and has significant environmental footprints. The Romans solved a local problem with a local, if pungent, solution. We solve a global problem with a global, but resource-intensive, process. It's not a question with a simple answer. As you stand by the fountain with Lucius, the clear water washing over his work-worn hands, you are standing at the very beginning of a chemical journey that stretches thousands of years into the future, a journey from the fermented jars of a Roman laundry to the catalytic chambers of a modern chemical plant, all in pursuit of the same, simple, powerful molecule. Lucius gives you a final nod and melts into the darkening streets, leaving you alone by the fountain. The day is over. The vats are still. The history, however, is very much alive within you. You look down at your own tunic, smelling faintly of the workshop, and instead of disgust, you feel a strange connection. This isn't just a story about a weird ancient habit. It's a story about pragmatism, about looking at the world and seeing not waste, but potential. The Roman embrace of urine was, at its core, a radical act of utility. They saw a problem, dirty clothes, and they used the most effective, readily available chemical tool they had, societal squeamishness be damned. The mainstream historical lesson here is one of resourcefulness in the face of scarcity. The Romans didn't have the industrial chemicals we take for granted. They had human bodies, and those bodies produced a consistent, renewable stream of a useful alkaline substance. So they built an entire industry around it, from collection to taxation to application. It speaks to a mindset that is both alien and deeply impressive, a relentless focus on function over form, on result over reputation. They valued the pristine white toga so highly that they were willing to wade through the stench to achieve it. The end justified the means, no matter how pungent the means might be. But here is the final, quirky, and deeply human thought that settles over you as the stars begin to appear over Rome. For all their engineering genius and imperial grandeur, the Romans were just people. People who got dirty, people who had to do laundry, people who had to make do. The history we often remember is one of emperors and legions, of laws and architecture. But the history of the fullonica is the history of the mundane, the everyday, smelly, and utterly necessary. It's a reminder that civilization isn't built on philosophy and poetry alone. It's built on a foundation of clean clothes, and someone, somewhere, has to do the dirty work to make that happen. And this, of course, leads us to the great, quiet debate that underlies all of social history, one that scholars will never truly resolve. How do we properly weigh the contributions of the everyday against the grand narratives of the elite? The name of the emperor who levied the urine tax, Vespasian is recorded for posterity. But what of Lucius, the master fuller? What of the boy rolling the collection jar? Their names are lost to time, yet their collective labor literally upheld the visual standard of an empire. They cleaned the fabric of Roman society in the most literal sense possible. As you finally turn to walk away, the cool night air finally erasing the last traces of ammonia from your nostrils, you carry with you a new definition of what it means to be civilized. It's not just about building aqueducts and writing laws. It's also about the unglamorous, practical, and sometimes smelly work of keeping the world clean, one vat of fermented urine at a time. The story of the Roman laundries fades now, like the last light from a workshop door being closed. The sharp, chemical smell of ammonia softens into the gentle, imagined scent of night-blooming flowers outside your window. The rhythmic sloshing from the vat slows, transforming into the quiet, steady rhythm of your own breath. All those bustling streets, those towering jars, those proud, stained hands of Lucius, they dissolve into the warm, dark quiet of your room. The past has had its say, sharing its peculiar, practical secrets. It's done its work, just like the fullers of old. There are no more debates to be had, no more historical puzzles to solve. Just the gentle weight of a shared human experience, stretching across 2,000 years, settling over you like the softest, cleanest woolen blanket. Let the images blur at the edges. Let the facts and the stories and the jokes all blend together into a pleasant, meaningless hum, a distant background noise to the quiet miracle of rest. The world, for tonight, is perfectly clean and perfectly still.